Bible tells us that we overcome evil with good, and not evil doesn't overcome evil. Evil can only be overcome by good. And so we come together to do that immediately.
All right, that was
Beautiful
a pastor
message
from down there in Sutherland.
Yeah, one of the guys that goes to that church. Let's bring in Robert Jeffress, who is the senior pastor at First Baptist Church. He's in Dallas and a Fox News contributor. Pastor Jeffress, great to see you this morning. We really need to talk to you because how do we get our arms around this as Christians or for people who are watching that don't believe in God?
You know, more than 30 years ago, when I was pastoring a small town church in West Texas, a man stopped. He was going through town, and he asked if he could talk to me. He wanted to tell me about something that had happened to him a few years earlier. In June of 1980, he was in the church service at First Baptist Church, Dangerville, Texas, when a gunman burst through the front door, opened fire on the parishioners, killing 5. Seated next to this man was his 11-year-old daughter, and he told me he watched as the gunman literally blew her face off with the gun blast. You know, he said his faith was shaken, but it wasn't destroyed. And you know, when we find ourselves in a situation where we cannot reconcile our faith in God with our circumstances, we have a choice. We can either give up our faith in God, or we can keep trusting God even in the darkness. And when we find ourselves in the darkness and we can't see God's hands, we can always trust God's heart. And that's what these church members in Sutherland Springs are doing right now. They don't understand the why. None of us do. But they trust God's heart.
Well, it's hard to get your head around it, why a loving God would allow something like this to happen. And I know you hear that question a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do, and whenever I hear that, I gently remind people what happened 2,000 years ago when God allowed, it was even a part of His plan, to allow His own Son, Jesus Christ, to be tortured, to be nailed to a cross. And you know, on Friday afternoon when Jesus was buried, it looked like evil had triumphed over good. But 3 days later, from the perspective of an empty tomb, it was sure that good had triumphed over evil. And what I would say about this tragedy is the final chapter has not yet been revealed. I think good will triumph over evil.
On that note, we just found out that the whole shooting was caught on tape. They were rolling inside the church. We'll be able to see that to some degree, I imagine, shortly. Meanwhile, people are saying, let's think practically. What about security? You have security in your church. But what about these smaller churches? What could they possibly do? I mean, if you want to volunteer as an usher, should you also volunteer as a security guard?
Yes, I think what we're finding from this example is perhaps smaller churches may even be more of a target than larger churches like mine. And look, you don't have to have a lot of money to do something. You can go to your local police department and ask them to do a threat assessment of your church. You can have an evacuation plan. You can enlist volunteers to serve as security watchers during the services. You can have common sense policies like we do of not allowing backpacks into the sanctuary. I mean, this is the world we're living in. We need to do everything we can to keep our parishioners safe. But overall, we can't be paralyzed by fear. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear.
Pastor Jeffress, what's the definition of faith, and how do you teach people to have faith?
Well, faith is believing that God is going to do what He has promised to do. And in this situation, look, evil is real, it's painful, the Bible never diminishes that, but faith means believing that one day God is going to overcome evil. And that's the hope of every Christian. When Christ returns, evil will be defeated forever.
Pastor, I heard one report that there were a number of people who were in the church but didn't have the guns with them because out of respect for the fact that they were going into church, they left their guns in their car. Is that common?
Well, it's certainly not common in our church. I'd say a quarter to half of our members are concealed carry. They have guns, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. They bring them into the church with them.
Probably makes you feel safer.
You know,
Yeah.
Well, I think it does. And I think, look, if somebody tries that in our church, they may get 1 shot off or 2 shots off, but that's it. And that's the last thing they'll ever do in this life.
Yeah, and let's just see, because most of these guys are cowards. They don't like when people shoot back. They like to hit defenseless people, and that won't be the case anymore. Thanks so much, Reverend. Appreciate it. Pastor.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
Jeffress.